Hello Year 5 and welcome to your reading lesson for today. So before we start off, we're going to do a quick retrieval practice about our chapter that we read yesterday for our new book, Dragon Rider. Okay, now you'll have these questions in front of you because they were sent home to you. So what I would like to do is pause the video and I'd like to see, do you think you can answer all of those questions? Okay, well, let's have a think and let's go through the answers together. So when did Rat know that the humans were coming to the Dragon Cave? Now, if we start at the beginning of the chapter, we have an introduction of where she's coming from. So she's coming down through the mountains and she's talking to herself. And quite a few times she says, well, I've known forever. I've known since winter. Since winter, that's really how long I've known for. So then that tells us that she's known since winter that humans were coming to the cave. So that was quite an easy answer because it actually said that in the text. What type of creature is sorrel? So we need to look to the second page and have a look at the description where it tells us what sorrel is. So if I remember from the top of my head, she had a yellow sulphur coloured coat. And it said at the end of it that she was what we call a brownie. Now, we don't associate brownies as being the name of an animal. We either associate it to a delicious chocolatey good that we can eat. Miss Humphrey can eat a lot of those. Or to the person for children who go and do training and train how to be a brownie, so a citizen and a good member of the public. But actually here we're describing sorrel as a brownie, so it must be some type of mythical creature, and hopefully we'll start to understand a little bit more about her character as we read through the story. How would you describe Rat's personality? Now this does require retrieval skills, but it doesn't necessarily explain to us what her personality is. So you need to retrieve certain parts of information to try and build your own opinion. So we know that she gets quite anxious and she mutters away to herself. We learnt the word peevishly yesterday. So she can be quite annoyed. Okay, and she can be quite unhappy. She shrieks a lot. She's impatient. She's bad-tempered. So if we were to use all of those words that we've identified from the text, we can start to get an idea of her personality, okay? She seems very helpful. She seems quite hyper and quite het up. She doesn't sound like she's the happiest rat in the world, but she seems very resourceful and very useful because she always has all this key information, but she doesn't like being picked on, okay? Why was the news that Rat delivered bad news? So we know we looked at Sorrel's response and Firedrake's response as well, that the humans are quite greedy and the humans will take anything they want. Now, based on the reactions when they were told that the humans were coming, they didn't seem best pleased. They seemed worried and they seemed anxious. So this would suggest to me that this news that's being delivered isn't good news because maybe something is going to go wrong. And maybe in the past there has been an issue before with the way the humans have behaved around the dragons. Now that's something we'll explore further on as we read through the book. What word did Sorrel use to describe the humans? Now I might have just given it away in our little recap. So there was a specific section on the third page that mentioned that Sorrel thought that humans were greedy. Well done. So they were quite greedy. Now, greedy means that they have lots and lots of something. So if Miss Humphrey was to be very greedy and eat lots of sweets, that means that I'm going to be eating lots of them. I'm not just going to take a couple of them. I'm going to be greedy. So that means to have more than I should or to have more than I want. Okay, so the humans were described as greedy. And what was the name of the dragon in that cave? So we need to find in the book where we are introduced to the dragon. And if you find that in your book, you'll know that his name is Firedrake. So he is one of our main dragons for our story. So for today, our learning objective is to summarise key information from the text. So by the end of the lesson, you need to know how to identify key words in a question. I'm going to teach those skills as we work through. You'll need to think very carefully about the order of events as they happened. You also need to be able to decide, well, what is key information and what's extra information that I might not need? And you need to be able to answer true or false statements based on the text that we're reading today. So let's turn to chapter 2. So you might want to make sure that you've got chapter 2 in front of you. Now you can either pause the video and you can have a read of it yourself, or you can carry on watching the video and you can listen to me read it with you. Okay, so chapter 2, a meeting in the rain. Slatebeard, the oldest dragon in the valley, had seen more than his memory could hold. His scales no longer glowed, but he could still breathe fire, and whenever the younger dragons were at a loss, they would come to ask his advice. Once all the other dragons had assembled outside Slatebeard's cave, Firedrake woke him. The sun had set, a black and starless sky lay over the valley, and it was still raining. When the dragon emerged from his cave, he looked gloomily up at the sky. His bones ached from the damp, and the cold weather made his joints stiff. The others respectfully made way for him. Slatebeard looked around. None of the dragons were missing, but Sorrel was the only brownie present. The old dragon, moved through the wet grass with heavy steps and a dragging tail towards a rock that rose in the valley like a giant's head covered with moss. Breathing hard, he climbed up on it and looked around. The other dragons gazed up at him like frightened children. Some of them were still very young and knew nothing about this valley. Others had come from Slatebeard himself from far, far away, and remembered that the world had not always belonged to mankind. They all scented misfortune, and they hoped he would deal with it, but Slatebeard was old and tired now. "Come up here, Rat," he said in a hoarse voice. "Tell us what you saw and heard." The rat scampered nimbly up the rock, climbed Slatebeard's tail, and crouched on his back. It was so quiet under the dark sky that only the sound of the rain falling and the rustle of foxes out hunting by night could be heard. Rat cleared her throat. "Humans are coming!" she cried. "They roused their machines and fed them and sent them on their way. They're already eating a path through the mountains, only 2 days' journey from here. The fairies will hold them at bay for a while, but they'll get here soon time or other, because it's this valley of yours they're making for." A groan ran through the ranks of the dragons. They raised their heads and pressed closer around the rock where Slatebeard stood. Firedrake was a little way away from the others, with Sorrel perched on his back, nibbling a dried mushroom. "Oh, terrific rat," she muttered. "Couldn't you have put it a little more tactfully?" "What does that mean?" one of the dragons called out. "Why would they want to come here? Surely they have all they want where they are." "Humans never have all they want," replied Rat. "Let's hide away until they go away again," suggested another dragon. Okay, so we are going to have a look at some vocabulary that has appeared up in this part of our book. So let's have a look at the quote here on page 6. The dragons had assembled outside. Now, the word we're going to look at is assembled. Now, this is a verb, but because we have the ed suffix on the end, this makes it past tense. Okay, so the root word is to assemble. Now, assembled in past tense is 3 syllables, so assembled. Okay, if it was just assemble, it'd be assemble. So it's still 3 syllables, even with the additional letter on the end. Now, to define what assembled means, it means to gather in one place for a common purpose. So, for example, if you think about our assemblies, we assemble for an assembly. That means we all get together all in one room for the same purpose, and that's to have an assembly with a teacher, the head teacher, or your class. So let's put it into a sentence. So the Avengers assembled for their final task. So any of you Avenger fans out there, you'll know exactly what I mean. So we know that synonyms are words that mean the same. So if we were to try and replace that word, assembled, we could say the Avengers convened for their final task, the Avengers gathered, the Avengers congregated, or the Avengers met for their final task. So it means to come together. Now, the antonyms are going to be the opposite of what assembled means. So rather than getting together, we're going to be describing them as not being together, so apart. So we could use the words like disperse, so people disperse. You could have distribute, spread out, scatter, or divide, okay? So we know from looking at those dividings, when we separate things into smaller piles, so if we had a large group of people and we divided them, they would all move out into smaller groups. And obviously to spread out is going to be the opposite of what it means to come together, to assemble, okay? So let's go back and just look at the end of the sentence and we will read on. So, the way we've always done when one of them loses his way and turns up here. They're so blind they only see what they expect to see. They'll think we're odd-looking rocks, same as usual, or dead trees. But the rat shook her head. "Look here," she shrilled. "If you've been told once, I've told you 100 times. Those humans are making plans, but big animals don't listen to little animals, right?" She looked around her crossly. "You hide from human beings, but you aren't interested in what they're up to. Rats aren't so stupid. We go in their houses. We eavesdrop on them. We know what they're planning for your valley. Rat cleared her throat again and stroked her whiskers. Here she goes again, winding up the suspense, Sorrel whispered in Firedrake's ear, but the dragon ignored her. What are they planning then, Rat? Asked Slate wearily. Come on, tell us. Rat fiddled nervously with a whisker. It was no fun bringing bad news. They're going to flood the valley, she replied, her voice faltering. Soon there'll be nothing here but water. Your caves will be flooded, and none of the tall trees over there, she said, pointing one paw at the darkness. None of them will be left. Not even the treetops will show above the water. The dragon stared at her speechless. But that's impossible, one of them exclaimed at last. No one can do a thing like that. Not even us, and we're bigger and stronger than they are. Impossible, Rat laughed sarcastically. Bigger? Stronger? You don't get it at all. You tell them, Sorrel. Tell them what human beings are like. Maybe they'll believe you. With an injured expression, she wrinkled her sharp nose. The dragons turned to Firedrake and Sorrel. Rat's right, said the brownie. You've no idea. She spat on the ground and picked at a piece of moss stuck between her teeth. Okay, so let's have a look at another word in here. Now, this might be a very appropriate word, okay, bearing in mind we're heading towards the end of the week. So, on page 8, we have planning then, said Rat wearily. So the word we're going to look at here is wearily. Now, I'm just going to move my face so you can see one of the pictures at the bottom. There we go. So the word we're looking at is wearily, and this is an adverb. So an adverb is a word that describes a verb, okay? So it's an adjective that describes it. So if we're looking at it in terms of syllables, we're looking at 3 syllables. Wearily, wearily, so 3 syllables. Now, to define wearily means to be extremely tired. Now, you might be able to spot that from the pictures on the slide. We know that dogs don't tend to sleep like this. They tend to sleep with their paws out in front of them, their legs tucked under them. But this poor little dog is clearly beyond tired that we've just decided to faceplant the floor. Some of you might find that you do that when you get home onto the sofa and you just completely collapse and just go flat. This might be some of you. I know it definitely might be some of your teachers in the coming weeks. This is another picture of an example of being completely tired. Hopefully no one's fallen asleep at their desk just yet. So to put it into a sentence, the nurse sat down wearily after a hard day's work. So let's look at some synonyms to see how we could change that word to enhance the meaning. So we could use our synonyms. So the nurse sat down tiredly after a hard day's work. The nurse sat down exhausted after a hard day's work. The nurse sat down shattered after a hard day's work. The nurse sat down feeling fatigued after a hard day's work. So we're not talking about just being tired as a general tiredness after a day, but we're talking about an extreme tiredness, okay? So we're not just being tired, but being even more than tired. So we're taking that just a little bit further to deepen that meaning. Now, looking at the antonyms, we're looking at the opposite. So to know to be extremely opposite of tired is to be extremely awake. Now, some of you, like Hannah and Keaton, you come in every morning, and Maya, bouncing off the walls, which makes my classroom so much more joyful when you walk in the morning. But you're very energetic, you're very awake, very bouncy, very lively, very invigorated. So that's the opposite of being extremely tired. So you imagine how your body feels when you're tired, and it being extremely tired. And then imagine how your body feels when you've had a really good night's sleep, you've eaten well, you've woken up and you've had your breakfast, you feel energized and you feel ready for the day. So those are the antonyms, which are the opposite of that word. Okay, so we've looked at wearily, which is 3 syllables, so wearily, so to be extremely tired. Okay, we're now going to have a look at doing some of our summarizing questions today.